I stood near the back of that packed auditorium, the scratchy borrowed jacket clinging to my shoulders like it didn't want to be seen there either. My boots still had traces of oil from my morning shift, and I'd done my best to scrub the grease out from under my nails with a toothbrush in the gas station bathroom. Didn't help much. 6 years of working with my hands doesn't wash off in 20 minutes. The air inside smelled like perfume and polished wood, foreign to me. Too clean. Too refined. Not like the fast food wrappers and gasoline I'd spent most of my week in. But I didn't mind. Not yet. This was her day. My wife, Alina. The girl I married when all we had was a single twin mattress on the floor and shared dreams that felt too big for our one-bedroom life. I still remember the look in her eyes when she told me she wanted to be a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a good one. A woman who'd wear confidence like a tailored suit and walk into courtrooms with a purpose. I said yes before she even asked if it was crazy. I didn't need convincing. So I worked. 5 jobs, to be exact. Warehouse loader in the mornings. Janitor at a community college in the afternoons. Delivery driver in the evenings. Uber runs on weekends. And any time in between, I was under someone's hood fixing up old engines for cash. I'd sleep 4 hours a night, sometimes 3. It became normal. My eyes were always tired, but I didn't mind because every time I saw her smiling with those textbooks in her lap and her highlighters scattered across the bed, it felt worth it. And now she was walking across that stage in a black gown and a square hat, golden cords draped over her shoulders. She looked radiant, poised, powerful. My throat tightened as the dean called her name. Alina Monroe Wells. The crowd clapped, cheered, and whistled. I clapped too, smiling like a proud fool, even though I had to wipe my hands on my pants first to avoid staining the program they gave me. Then it happened. It started slow. She paused at the microphone, a cue card in her hand. She smiled. Not at me. Not even toward the back of the room where I stood. She smiled at someone near the front row. A man. Tall, clean-shaven, wearing a designer suit like he'd been born into it. His watch probably cost more than our old car. She walked over and kissed him. Not a polite peck, not a family hug, no. A full embrace. Slow. Familiar. I felt something splinter inside. Then she stepped back to the microphone, her voice sweet and confident. I want to thank my husband, she said, holding that man's hand like it had been hers all along. The man responsible for my success. The crowd roared. Laughter, applause, a few people stood. And I just stood there, frozen, invisible, betrayed. My ears rang. My heart pounded like it wanted out of my chest, like it didn't want to be in there anymore. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. Maybe she meant to say something else. Maybe I misheard. But the way she looked at him, the way she leaned into his shoulder with pride, that wasn't a mistake. That was planned. I felt the weight of 6 years crash down all at once. Every sleepless night. Every burned-out shift. Every time I skipped meals so we could cover rent. I had sacrificed everything, and in that moment, I didn't even exist. I didn't know how long I stood there. The applause faded. The next name was called. More cheering. Life moved on around me like I was just another background character no one remembered. My fingers clenched the ceremony program until it crumpled. I looked at the name again, Alina Monroe Wells. My last name. She still wore it on the program, even though she had just given my place to someone else. I turned and walked out. Not dramatically. No storming. Just walked. My legs felt hollow, like they weren't sure if they belonged to me anymore. Outside, the air hit me cold and sharp. I leaned against the brick wall of the auditorium and tried to breathe, but the breaths wouldn't come right. They stuttered like a bad engine. All I could hear was her voice echoing in my head. I want to thank my husband. But I was her husband. Wasn't I? The worst part wasn't the kiss or the speech. It was how certain she looked. Like she had rehearsed this version of her life. Like she had practiced rewriting the truth until it felt natural. I was a chapter she decided to skip during the reading. I slid my hands into my jacket pockets and stared out at the parking lot. People were hugging, taking selfies, posing with families and flowers. Proud fathers in polished shoes. Happy couples. Nobody noticed the man with oil on his sleeve standing in the shadows. I didn't cry. I don't know why. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe the betrayal hadn't sunk in fully. Or maybe deep down, some part of me had always feared this moment. That once she made it, I wouldn't be enough anymore. That I was only part of the climb, not the view. My phone buzzed. A message from Maribel, Alina's cousin. Where are you? I'm here too. I didn't reply. I just stared up at the sky, the clouds moving slow and heavy like they had nowhere better to be. Like me. It's strange how quiet the world gets when everything inside you is making noise. I don't know how long I stood there before I finally moved. I walked down the sidewalk, past the balloons and gift bags, past the camera flashes. No one stopped me. No one noticed. And for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't walking toward her. I was walking away. The hallway outside the auditorium was quiet, colder than I expected. Maybe it was just me. I walked like a man trying not to think, but every step echoed with memories I didn't ask for. Her laugh. The way she used to leave sticky notes in my lunchbox. The tears she shed when she failed her first mock trial. The promises. The late-night pep talks. All of it clung to me like the scent of oil in my clothes. I told myself to just breathe, to keep walking and not look back. But betrayal doesn't let go that easy. It follows you like a second skin. I made it halfway down the corridor when I heard my name. Well, not my name exactly, just a soft voice behind me. Excuse me. Jonah, right? I turned slowly. It was Maribel, Alina's cousin. I hadn't seen her in a while. She was younger, maybe mid-20s now, wearing a simple dress with a long cream-colored cardigan and flats. She looked out of place, like she didn't quite belong in that polished sea of suits and designer heels. Her face was tight with confusion, her eyebrows pulled together as if she was trying to make sense of what she'd just seen. You're the one she told me about, she said, stepping closer. The one who paid for everything. Are you her husband? I couldn't answer. My throat felt like sandpaper. I just stared at her, trying to find the right words and failing. She blinked a few times, clearly trying to piece things together. Then who was that guy? The one she kissed on stage? She called him her husband. Still, I didn't speak. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because nothing I could say would make sense of what had just happened. And I was tired. Tired in a way that went far beyond sleep. She told me. Maribel started again, her voice cracking a little. She told me you worked like crazy to support her. That you had, like, 5 jobs. That you even got injured on one shift and kept going anyway. That you slept in the car between shifts sometimes. I nodded slightly. I did. She looked down at her shoes. So why would she? I gave a sad little shrug and finally spoke. Because that story doesn't fit the new version she wants to tell. That hit her. I saw it. Her jaw tightened. I'm sorry, she said quickly, as if she could fix it. That was disgusting. What she did up there, acting like you don't exist. That wasn't just wrong, it was cruel. Let her have her moment, I said, my voice low. She earned the degree. I'm not going to take that from her. But she erased you, Maribel whispered. You're not some footnote. You were the whole damn chapter. I chuckled dryly, a humorless sound that hurt more than helped. Not anymore, I guess. She folded her arms tightly. I swear, I'm going to say something to her. No, I said quickly, gently. Don't. It won't change anything. What she did, that wasn't an accident. She chose that moment, that man, that lie. Maribel hesitated, visibly holding back her anger. You don't deserve this. I nodded again, slower this time. I know. We stood there in silence. The sounds of laughter and celebration filtered faintly through the walls behind us. I could almost hear her voice, Alina, maybe talking to Troy now, introducing him to her professors, posing for pictures. I bet she looked flawless. I bet not one person asked her where her real husband was. I bet none of them even knew I existed. And that was the worst part. Being forgotten while still breathing. Maribel finally broke the quiet. So, what are you going to do now? I exhaled. That was the question, wasn't it? What do you do when the person you gave everything to rewrites the story without you? When you realize you were just the scaffolding she used to build her dream, only to be taken down before the unveiling? I don't know, I admitted. But I can't stay in this hallway. That much I'm sure of. Maribel touched my arm lightly. If you ever want to talk or need anything. I mean it. You were good to her. Everyone in the family knew that. I always thought you were too quiet about it. But now I get it. Quiet doesn't mean weak. I looked at her. She wasn't crying, but her eyes glistened. She really meant it. Thanks, I said softly. But I think I just need space right now. To figure out who I am without all this. Okay, she said, stepping back. But Jonah. I paused, waiting. You didn't lose anything today. She did. And with that, she walked away. I stayed in the corridor a few minutes longer, until the footsteps faded and the hallway returned to silence. I looked around at the university banners on the walls, the smiling photos of past graduates, all those proud faces frozen in time. I used to imagine Alina's picture up there one day. I used to dream of pointing at it and saying, "That's my wife." We built that dream together. But that wasn't my dream anymore. Not the way she told it. I stepped out into the sunlight. It was too bright for how I felt, but I welcomed it. My eyes squinted and watered, not from crying, I told myself, just from the light. The breeze was strong now, sharp against my face, like it was trying to snap me awake. I looked down at my hands. Calloused, cracked, tired, but they still worked. They still built things. Maybe not degrees, but other things. Real things. People were still pouring out of the building, families hugging, cars pulling up, camera flashes firing. I moved through them like a shadow, just a man in an oversized jacket, walking toward nothing in particular. For once, I wasn't in a rush. I didn't have anywhere to be. No shift to clock into. No delivery app buzzing. No engine waiting to be fixed. It felt strange, freeing, and terrifying. I passed a florist selling roses out of a cart. A kid held a sign that read, "Congrats, grad," and I smiled at him. He waved. I waved back. For a second, I imagined an alternate version of today, where she ran into my arms after the ceremony, where she cried and laughed and kissed me like no one else existed, where she said, "We made it." But that version was just a flicker. It faded fast. I crossed the street, away from the crowd, toward the old bench I used to wait on during her night classes. I sat there, elbows on my knees, watching traffic. For 6 years, I waited on this bench after shifts, handing her a warm sandwich and an energy drink before she went back to study. I thought love looked like sacrifice. But maybe it also looks like knowing when to stop giving to someone who only takes. Let her have her moment. The speech. The applause. The man in the suit. Me? I needed to find mine. The party wasn't my scene. Never had been. Never would be. But I showed up anyway. Not for her. Not to cause a scene. Not even for closure, really. I showed up for me. I parked 2 blocks away. Not because I couldn't find space, but because I didn't want to be seen pulling up in a rust-bitten Honda Civic with a half-working air conditioner and a cracked side mirror. That car had carried pizzas, groceries, tired passengers, and my worn-out body through more nights than I cared to count. Tonight, it carried something else, a thick manila envelope, sealed and heavy with years of proof. It sat in the passenger seat like a sleeping truth, waiting to be woken. Her engagement party was held at a rooftop venue downtown, one of those places that smelled like expensive champagne and people pretending to be better than they were. Everyone up there looked polished, suits fitted just right, dresses hugging waistlines that probably had personal trainers behind them. Laughter floated through the warm air like perfume. Lights twinkled above. Glasses clinked. Music hummed low beneath the chatter. I was wearing the same jacket from the graduation, creased now, a little tighter in the shoulders, still not mine. I walked in alone. No one noticed me at first. That was fine. I had no interest in stealing the spotlight. I just needed to stand in it for a few minutes before walking away. I scanned the room. There she was. Alina. Standing beside him. Troy. The man with the tailored suit and the smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. They were holding hands, greeting guests, laughing at things that didn't sound all that funny. Her hair was swept up, earrings glittering like tiny betrayals. She looked beautiful, but not like the woman I once knew. No, this version of her had traded in midnight study sessions and stress-eaten ramen for wine glasses and press-on smiles. People surrounded them, colleagues, friends, maybe even some of the professors who had once sent me thank you notes for helping fund her bar prep. They didn't recognize me now. Or maybe they did and didn't want to. Someone handed me a glass of champagne. I took it out of reflex, but didn't drink it. The MC cleared his throat and tapped the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with that cheesy excitement people use when they're about to pretend they aren't judging you. "It's time for the toast." The room hushed. I moved forward. I don't remember deciding to. My legs just started walking. Like they'd been waiting for this moment all along. Like they knew what came next before I did. I reached the mic just as the MC stepped back. Alina looked confused. Troy looked amused. A few people tilted their heads like they were trying to place me. I held up my hand. "Just a minute," I said quietly. And then I opened the envelope. The first thing I pulled out was a faded tuition receipt, her first semester. Community college. Before the fancy law school, before the condos, before the new man in the erased name. Back when she still needed bus fare and coffee money and reassurance at 2 a.m. I held it up for the crowd to see. "This," I said, "is how it started." No one moved. The room was still. I placed the receipt on the table beside me and kept going. There were more. Printouts of rent payments, grocery store receipts, utility bills with both our names, even a screenshot of a Venmo transfer labeled book money. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in. You said he's the man behind your success, I continued, my voice steady. But I was the one washing dishes in the back of a diner while you lived in that downtown condo. I was the one delivering food at 2 a.m., hoping my noise didn't wake the neighbors while you crammed for finals. I fixed broken radiators, hauled boxes, cleaned toilets, and worked through migraines so your lights never went out. I slept in my car sometimes so I wouldn't miss my next job. I did it because I believed in you. I turned toward her. She looked frozen, lips parted, eyes wide, her hand now limp in Troy's. I didn't come here to embarrass you, I said. I came here to reclaim my voice. You erased me, in front of everyone, and I let you, but not tonight. I stepped away from the mic and laid the last item on the table. A photo of us from our first anniversary, young, broke, smiling, covered in birthday cake and hope. The silence felt like a second skin. No one clapped. No one whispered. Even the music had stopped. I looked at Troy. He still wore that smug look, but there was tension behind it now, like a man unsure if he was standing on solid ground or a rug about to be yanked out. I walked off the stage slowly, each step lighter than the one before. No one stopped me. No one needed to. My job was done. As I reached the elevator, I heard someone call after me. Wait. I turned. It was Maribel, pushing through the stunned crowd. Her eyes were glassy, but she was smiling. That was incredible, she said, catching her breath. They needed to hear it. She needed to hear it. I gave a small nod. I didn't do it for her. I know, she said. You did it for you. The elevator doors opened behind me. I stepped in, but held it open for a second. You okay? She asked, voice soft. I met her eyes. For the first time in a long while, yeah, I think I am. She smiled, then backed away as the doors began to close. The last thing I saw before they shut was Alina's face, pale, unreadable, still locked in the crowd that no longer looked so proud. As the elevator hummed downward, I finally exhaled. I didn't feel like a broken man anymore. I felt like someone waking up after a long, heavy sleep. The doors opened to the empty lobby. I stepped out and let the cool air wash over me as I exited into the street. The city didn't look different, but I did. I wasn't anyone's shadow anymore. I wasn't a footnote or a ghost in someone else's story. Tonight, I had stepped into the light, and I didn't need permission to stay there. The video was never supposed to go viral. I didn't even know someone had filmed it. 1 minute, I was back at my place, quietly making dinner, eggs, toast, and some leftover rice, and the next, my phone was lighting up like a pinball machine. Calls, messages, notifications from apps I didn't even remember installing. I didn't touch the phone for a while. I just stared at it, buzzing and glowing, like it was waiting to break more news to me. When I finally picked it up, the first message I saw was from Maribel. It's everywhere. You're trending. Don't panic. Too late. I tapped the link she sent me, and there it was, me, standing on that rooftop stage, holding years of receipts in one hand and my soul in the other. The caption read, 5 jobs. 1 lie. The man who funded his wife's dream and got erased. I watched myself speak. I watched the people stare, the shock settle in. I saw Alina's face again, but this time through 100 angles. Somebody had recorded from the side. Another clip caught Troy's smug expression melting like ice in the sun. I watched myself walk away and felt the same strange stillness I'd felt that night. But now it wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the world. The comments flooded in. Thousands of them. This man deserves the world. She didn't just betray him, she robbed him of his credit. I worked 3 jobs to support my partner through med school. This hit me hard. Protect this man at all costs. Finally, someone said what so many of us go through. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to process it. 6 years of sacrifice, swallowed in silence, and now millions of strangers knew my story. And not only did they know, they felt it. I opened Instagram. Same thing. Facebook. Same. Even my old LinkedIn account, which I hadn't touched. One guy even said he left his cheating fiancée after watching my speech. Another woman said her brother cried for the first time in years watching it. I was just a man with calloused hands and a tired back. But somehow, I had become something more. Maribel came by the next morning. She brought coffee and a sandwich and shoved both into my hands before I could even greet her properly. You need to eat, she said. And before you say anything, yes, I've read the comments, too. And yes, everyone's on your side. Even my mom, who loved Alina. I sat on the couch, still trying to find words. You okay? She asked, sitting beside me. I don't know, I admitted. I feel like I should be angry or overwhelmed or something, but mostly, I just feel quiet. She nodded. Quiet's good. Quiet means your mind's making space. I sipped the coffee. It was still warm. Strong, the way I liked it. Somehow, Maribel remembered. You gonna do interviews? She asked. I shook my head. What's there to say that I haven't already said? She raised an eyebrow. People want to hear more. Your story gave them something to hold on to. I didn't tell it for them, I said softly. No, but you told it truthfully. And that matters. Later that day, a few reporters did reach out. One woman said she ran a podcast for working-class heroes. Another offered to fly me out to New York for a morning show appearance. I declined them all. It wasn't about being noble or mysterious. I just didn't want to be picked apart or repackaged into something slick and forgettable. I'd spent enough time being edited out of my own life. Meanwhile, Alina tried to spin it. I saw a short statement she'd posted on her profile. There has been some confusion about my recent graduation celebration. The man in the video is a part of my past, and while I am grateful for every step in my journey, life is complex. Please don't reduce it to one moment. The comments under that post didn't go well. You mean the husband who paid for everything? This man was your foundation, and you thanked another guy? Complexity isn't an excuse for betrayal. Her law firm went quiet. No congratulatory posts. No reposts of her speech. Even the firm's Instagram deleted her graduation day photos. Quiet, but telling. Maribel texted me again that night. Even her mentors are backing off. They know what she did. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing sweet about watching someone's house of cards collapse, not even if they'd built it on your back. But I won't lie. I felt something lift. Not revenge. Not gloating. Just relief. Like a weight I'd carried for too long had finally been set down where it belonged. I went back to work. Fixed an alternator. Replaced a set of brakes. Cleaned a spark plug that had rusted from too much rain and not enough care. My hands still did what they knew, even if the world was watching now. It grounded me. Kept me from floating away in the noise. But people noticed me now. Customers shook my hand longer. Asked, "Are you that guy from the video?" One woman handed me cookies. Another left a thank you note on the counter. "You spoke for people like us," she'd written. "You reminded me that our worth isn't measured in degrees or speeches, but in loyalty and effort and love." I tucked that note in my wallet. It stayed there beside an old photo of my dad and a list of apartment repairs I still needed to make. Weeks passed. The story faded from the front pages, replaced by whatever scandal or celebrity feud came next. But it lived on in smaller places, in break-room conversations, in marriage counseling sessions, in forums where people whispered truths they were scared to say out loud. I kept to myself, mostly. But I wasn't hiding. Not anymore. One day, Maribel swung by the garage with a clipboard and a wild idea in her eyes. "You ever think about opening your own shop?" she asked, leaning against the hood of a half-finished Nissan. I blinked. "What? You've got skills, you've got respect, you've got a story. And now, you've got a whole city behind you. People would support it." I laughed, not unkindly. "You think going viral means I can suddenly run a business?" She grinned. "I think going viral reminded you that you're capable. The rest? You already had it. You've just been too busy making others shine to notice your own light." I looked around the shop. The rust. The smell of engine oil. The cracked concrete under my boots. Then I looked at her, Maribel. Steady. Fierce. A little chaotic. But real. Maybe she was right. Maybe for the first time, this wasn't about getting back at Alina. Maybe this was about getting back to me. I never set out to become a symbol. I didn't want the attention, the labels, the inbox full of praise and pity and podcast invites. All I wanted was peace, space to work, to breathe, to live a life that didn't revolve around someone else's dreams. But Maribel, she saw something I didn't. "You're not just fixing cars, Jonah," she said one morning, standing in my cluttered kitchen with a chipped mug in her hand. "You're fixing something bigger. People see that." I waved her off, half laughing. "You give me too much credit." "No," she said firmly. "You don't give yourself enough." And maybe she was right. Because not long after that conversation, I found myself standing in front of a dusty old garage space on the edge of town. Broken windows, rusted shutters, a flickering light barely clinging to life above the door. But it had bones. The kind of structure you could build something on, something real, something lasting. I signed the lease 2 days later. Wells and Wrenches. That's what the sign would read. Maribel said the name had weight, that it carried a story without needing to explain it. I wasn't just a man with a wrench. I was someone who had rebuilt from the ground up. And that kind of story, people respected. The first few weeks were chaos in slow motion. The place needed work. Gutting, painting, rewiring, organizing. I worked from sunup to sundown, scrubbing years of grime from the walls and clearing out old tools that hadn't seen daylight since before the internet existed. Maribel came by with volunteers, teens from the neighborhood, a few former coworkers who'd lost their jobs during the pandemic, even a retired mechanic named Mr. Landry who said he just wanted to be part of something that mattered again. That hit me, because I hadn't thought about it like that. But it did matter. We started small: oil changes, brake repairs, tire rotations. The basics. Word spread fast. People who had seen the video came in just to shake my hand. Some left thank you notes in the waiting area. Others brought food, even if we didn't ask for it. One afternoon, a woman named Camille dropped off her teenage son, Darnell. He's been skipping class, hanging with the wrong crowd, she said, her voice shaky. But he's good with his hands. He just needs someone to believe in him. I looked at Darnell, hood up, arms crossed, eyes defiant. I saw myself in him. Not the man I was now, but the boy I used to be. Lost. Angry. Invisible. Tell him to come back tomorrow, I said. We'll start with tool safety. He did. Quiet at first. Then curious. Then, slowly, committed. And he wasn't the only one. Every week, more kids came around. Some curious, some desperate, some just needing a space to be useful. I taught them what I knew, not just engines, but life. How to show up on time. How to own your mistakes. How to take pride in dirty hands and honest work. We created a rhythm. Monday to Friday, the shop buzzed with repairs and laughter. On Saturdays, we hosted free classes, basic car maintenance, resume building, interview prep. Maribel organized them with the precision of a general, clipboard always in hand. She was something else. She never hovered, never made things about her, but she was always there, helping, planning, encouraging. I started looking forward to her visits more than I realized. There was a steadiness to her, a calm in the storm I didn't know I needed until I had it. And slowly, I changed too. The weight in my chest? It began to lift. The sting of Alina's betrayal? Still there, but dull now, like an old scar instead of an open wound. I stopped checking her social media. Stopped wondering what Troy was doing. Stopped replaying that graduation scene like it was on a loop in my head. Because this was real. One afternoon, as I wiped grease off my forearms and watched Darnell high-five one of the younger boys for diagnosing a faulty alternator, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Pride. Not the kind tied to someone else's success, but the kind that comes from building something with your own hands and watching it grow. Hey, Maribel said, walking over with a bottle of water. We've got 2 more kids signed up for next week's class. Yeah, I said, accepting the water with a nod. That's good. She smiled. You're making a difference, Jonah. I looked around the shop, at the half-fixed cars, the laughter bouncing off the concrete walls, the sunlight catching the logo we had just stenciled onto the front window. Feels like I finally started living my own life, I said. Maribel's smile softened. Took you long enough. We both laughed, and for a moment, it felt like all the noise from the past had faded into the background. Like maybe I wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe I was becoming. Later that week, the local paper ran a story. From broken trust to turning wrenches. How one man built a legacy from sacrifice. It wasn't flashy. Just a small column buried between school district updates and farmers market news. But it meant something. People clipped it out and brought it to the shop. One woman framed it and gave it to me as a gift. Mr. Landry chuckled when he saw it. Told you this place had magic, he said, slapping my back. I didn't argue, because maybe it did. Not the kind of magic that fixes everything overnight, but the kind that reminds you life doesn't end just because someone rewrote your chapter. You just start a new one. Wells and Wrenches became more than a shop. It became a place where people came to be seen, to be valued. Where no one asked about your past, only what you were willing to do with your present. Where kids who were once labeled as troublemakers now ran diagnostics like pros and took pride in work that no one used to expect from them. And in teaching them, I relearned my own worth. One day, as I stood outside the shop, watching the sun dip low behind the trees, Maribel came to stand beside me. "You really did it," she said. I nodded quietly. "It's just the beginning," I replied. And I meant it. Because the man I used to be, the one who poured himself out to fuel someone else's fire, he was gone. The man standing here now? He was made of steel and fire too. But this time, it was for himself. It started with a screenshot. I was in the shop late, replacing a brake pad on an old minivan that rattled like a soda can full of coins, when my phone buzzed on the workbench. I wiped my hands on a rag, expecting a parts delivery update or maybe a text from Maribel about Saturday's youth workshop. But it was a message from one of the apprentices, Luis. "Thought you should see this." Attached was a screenshot of Alina's LinkedIn profile. I squinted at it through the smudged screen protector. Her job title had changed. It no longer read Associate Attorney, Harrison and West. It now read Former Associate Attorney. I blinked. Read it again. Then again. A second screenshot followed. This one was a thread on some legal forum. A few familiar names from her old firm were discussing something vague. Optics. Loss of client trust. Internal review. Nothing direct. Just enough to draw a picture. I stood still for a long time, grease drying on my hands. It wasn't joy I felt. Not even satisfaction. Just a slow, sinking silence. The kind that fills a room when the last echo dies out. Alina's castle was crumbling. I didn't reach out to her. I had no reason to. We hadn't spoken since the night of the engagement toast, and I intended to keep it that way. But life has a strange sense of timing, and 2 days later, her name lit up my phone. Alina. I stared at it until the call went to voicemail. She didn't leave one. Then came the text. "I never thought you'd actually walk away." That was all it said. No explanation. No apology. Just one sentence. Flat. Almost confused. I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? "Of course you didn't think I'd leave." Because for 6 years, I stayed. I gave. I worked 5 jobs and still showed up with dinner and a smile. You thought I'd always be there, quiet, dependable, invisible. But not anymore. The next few weeks brought more rumors. Apparently, Troy's father, one of the senior partners, had tried to intervene, smoothing over the backlash. But the firm cared more about its image than its legacy. Public embarrassment? Viral betrayal? Not good for business. They cut ties quietly. Alina was left standing in the ruins. I heard Troy left too, not officially, not in headlines, but through whispers. A friend of a friend said he moved back to the East Coast. Another rumor said he'd taken a leave of absence to focus on family. But the way people said it, it was clear. He didn't want to deal with the fallout. He wasn't built for it. Funny thing is, Alina used to joke that I wasn't ambitious enough, that I didn't know how to play the game. And yet, here I was. Still standing. Still building. Still growing. Wells and Wrenches had its best month yet. We expanded into the unit next door, added 3 new bays, and started a partnership with a local trade school. The youth program had waitlists now. Parents wanted their kids to learn under the man who stood up for himself. The media buzz had quieted, but the impact hadn't. I'd walk into the grocery store and someone would nod at me like they'd known me for years. A bus driver gave me a free ride when my car battery died. Even the bank manager smiled differently when I came in to open a business account. I wasn't used to it. Still learning how to receive without suspicion. Maribel kept me grounded. She never made a big deal out of it. Just nudged me when I doubted myself, reminded me of where I'd started. She was around more now. Not in a clingy way, just present. Helpful. She knew when to talk and when to just sit beside me in silence. One evening, I sat with her outside the shop, watching the lights buzz on across the block. The sky was streaked with orange and purple. We shared a bag of chips, passing it back and forth like we used to share midnight takeout in my delivery car during long shifts. "You think she regrets it?" Maribel asked quietly. I knew who she meant. I didn't answer right away. "Maybe," I said finally, "but not for the reasons that matter." She glanced at me. "What do you mean?" "She regrets losing control, losing face, losing the narrative. But I don't think she regrets letting go of me. Not really. Because she never valued me in the first place." Maribel looked down at her shoes. "I'm sorry." I shook my head. "Don't be." I needed to see the truth. I kept making excuses for her, for what we had. But it wasn't love. Not in the way that lasts. Maribel didn't say anything. She didn't need to. In the silence, I realized something else. I didn't need her apology either. I didn't need closure from Alina. Didn't need her to cry or beg or fall apart in front of me. Her silence told me enough. Her text was the last gasp of a story that had already ended. And I was already pages ahead. That night, I stayed late after everyone else left. I walked through the bays, listening to the echoes of the day. Laughter, tools clinking, engines revving. I touched the fresh paint on the wall, looked at the new logo, saw my name, my real name, framed in metal. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. I cleaned up, locked the doors, and walked to my car. Just as I slid into the driver's seat, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Alina. You're different now. I stared at the screen. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because she was right. I was different. I was no longer the man waiting for her to see my worth. I was the man who saw it for himself. The letter from Malcolm Dorsey sat unopened on my desk for nearly a week. I knew what was inside before I even tore the envelope. His name alone carried a reputation. He was one of the best trial lawyers in the state, a man who turned courtroom drama into symphonies and had a win record that made insurance companies tremble. But it wasn't the man or his reputation that made my hands hesitate over that envelope. It was what he represented. Revenge. And I didn't know if I had room for it anymore. Maribel was the one who first brought his name up. We were organizing tools at the shop, elbows deep in a pile of donated wrenches and sockets, when she looked at me and said, "You know you could sue her, right?" I paused. "For what?" "For everything," she replied. "The 6 years. The money. The damage. There's precedent. You supported her financially while she built her career. You were married. There's value in that." I went quiet, because I had thought about it. Late at night, staring at the ceiling while the fan spun in slow, lazy circles. I'd imagined a courtroom, imagined laying everything bare. The receipts. The betrayal. The viral moment that made the world see me. I imagined her sitting on the other side of the courtroom, forced to answer for the years she tried to erase. But I also imagined the cost. The dragging, public mess. The headlines. The emotional toll. And worst of all, the risk of becoming the very thing I'd fought not to be, bitter. "You should at least hear what he has to say," Maribel said gently, handing me the letter. "It doesn't mean you have to go through with it. But you deserve to know your options." So I took the letter, brought it home, left it on my desk, walked around it for 6 days like it was radioactive. On the 7th day, I opened it. It was exactly what I expected. Professional, calculated, detailed. Malcolm Dorsey offered a full spousal repayment strategy. He cited similar cases, laid out the timeline, explained the legal argument that my labor, financial support, and emotional investment during Alina's law school years were grounds for reimbursement, especially given the public and personal damage. He ended it with a handwritten note. "Mr. Wells, I don't take every case, but I believe this one matters. When you're ready, I'm a phone call away." That night, I stayed late at the shop. Everyone else had gone home. The garage was quiet, the air tinged with motor oil and dust. I sat at my workbench, the letter in one hand, a cup of coffee in the other, and I thought about what it would mean. Maribel stopped by, like she always did when she sensed I needed grounding. "You thinking about it?" she asked softly, nodding toward the papers. "Yeah," I said. Hard not to. She didn't speak right away, just sat beside me, legs swinging slightly as she leaned back on her hands. "I want to say something," she said eventually, "but only if you'll let me." I nodded. "Go ahead. You could sue her and win. I know it. Dorsey's the best, and she deserves to answer for what she did, for what she took. I want her to answer for it." Her voice was firm, but it trembled a little, not with weakness, but with something that mattered. "But," she added, "I also know you, and I don't want you to lose who you've become just to prove what she did was wrong." I looked down at my hands. Still rough, still cracked, but now steady. "I don't want to become that man either," I said quietly. "I've spent too long trying to dig myself out of her shadow. I don't want to double you." That weekend, the shop was full. Young apprentices polishing tools, an elderly couple getting their tires rotated, a single dad waiting on a brake inspection while his daughter played with a toy car on the floor. Life buzzed around me, real and messy and full of warmth. It reminded me why I started all this. Not for revenge, but for rebirth. On Sunday, I called Malcolm. He answered after 2 rings. "Mr. Wells," he said, voice calm and deep. "I expected your call. I appreciate the offer," I said. "Truly. But I'm going to pass." A beat of silence. "May I ask why?" I didn't build this new life just to tear someone else's down. I'd rather keep building. Another pause, then a quiet chuckle. You're a better man than most. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I'm just tired of being angry. He understood. He didn't try to push. Before we hung up, he said one more thing. Just know, if you ever change your mind, I'm still a phone call away. I thanked him, then put the phone down. I felt lighter after that. Like a decision I hadn't realized was weighing me had finally been lifted. That night, I walked through the shop alone again. The echo of footsteps, the scent of rubber and grease, the hum of a new life forming in silence. I walked past Darnell and Luis's workstations, both lined with tools they now kept with pride. Past the framed article from the local paper. Past the workbench where I'd first unpacked my grief and turned it into purpose. This was mine. This belonged to me. Not because I fought for revenge, but because I chose something stronger. Something lasting. Forgiveness wasn't about her. It was about freeing myself. And walking away from that lawsuit was my final step out of the cage she tried to keep me in. I didn't need a courtroom. I already had my justice. It was in the eyes of every kid who looked up to me. In the calloused hands that still created. In the shop that breathed with second chances. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked into the night. No applause. No cameras. Just peace. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The envelope was cream-colored and slightly wrinkled at the edges, like it had been carried around too long. No return address. Just my name written in soft, familiar handwriting that I hadn't seen in months. Alina. I didn't open it right away. It had come tucked between junk mail and a utility bill. If I hadn't looked twice, I might have tossed it. But the way she wrote my name, it pulled something out of me I wasn't prepared for. Not longing. Not anger. Just recognition. The ghost of a life I once lived. I held the envelope for a long time. Ran my thumb across the fold. I could almost see her sitting at a desk somewhere, pen in hand, words spilling out slower than usual. Alina wasn't the type to write letters. She was sharp-tongued and quick-witted. The kind of woman who liked texts with perfect punctuation and emails that read like mini essays. A handwritten letter meant she'd run out of ways to package herself. It meant this wasn't rehearsed. Still, I didn't know if I wanted to read it. I placed it on my desk, then left it there for 3 days. Each night, I walked past it, cleaned around it, avoided looking directly at it. I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it would say. Guilt leaves a trail. It shows up in small gestures, in things left unsaid. And when people realize they've lost the right to fix something, they reach out not to rebuild, but to relieve their own burden. That envelope felt like that. But on the 4th night, something shifted. I'd just finished cleaning the garage. Everyone had gone home. The lights hummed low, and a soft rain tapped against the windows. I sat on the stool near the back bay, sipping black coffee, still in my coveralls. My hands were sore. My shoulders ached. And I was tired. Not just physically, but from carrying things that didn't belong to me anymore. So I stood up, walked inside, sat at my desk, and opened the envelope. The paper was thick, lined faintly. Her handwriting was rushed, as if she'd been holding it in too long and couldn't stop once it started. I read the first few lines. Jonah, I don't know how to start this. I've tried typing it, speaking it, screaming it into my pillow, but none of it felt real until I wrote it down. Maybe because what I did to you was the most real thing I've ever done, and also the most shameful. I kept reading. You paid for everything. Every bill. Every book. Every meal I ordered while you were working late nights just to keep the lights on. And still, you smiled. You gave. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And I threw it all away. I don't even know why I let it happen. Maybe it was ego. Maybe it was the pressure to fit into the world I thought I wanted so badly. Troy looked like the life I imagined for myself. You looked like the life I came from. And I was too stupid to see that the life I had with you was already more valuable than anything he could ever offer. She went on. Stories I didn't know about. Doubts she'd had. Nights she felt like an imposter in law school, but didn't want to show weakness. How she used my sacrifice as a shield and resented me for it. Because I reminded her of how far she had to go and how far she'd fallen when she finally betrayed me. It wasn't a love letter. It wasn't a plea. It was a confession. One long, messy, tear-stained attempt to offload what she could no longer carry. I lost more than my husband that day, she wrote. I lost the only person who ever saw me as more than a resume, as more than a performance. I stopped reading there, folded the letter in half, I didn't cry, didn't slam a fist down or shout into the empty room. I just sat there with the paper in my hands, quiet, still. A part of me wanted to finish it. The other part, the one that had spent so many years giving, felt like that halfway mark was enough. Some stories don't need to be reopened. They need to stay folded. I slid the letter into the bottom drawer of my desk. Not out of hate, not even bitterness. Just a choice. A clean break. I built something new now. This shop. These kids. This community. A life made of scraped knuckles and honest work and days where I could look at my reflection and not feel like a stranger. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about moving on without dragging the past behind you like a chain. I wasn't angry anymore, but I also wasn't interested in revisiting who we were. Later that week, Maribel noticed I seemed quieter than usual. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a mug of coffee and sat beside me on the curb outside the shop. "You good?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Yeah." "Letter?" she guessed. I gave a small smile. "Yeah." "You read it?" "Halfway." She didn't ask why I stopped. She didn't need to. Some people just get it. "I'm proud of you," she said after a moment, "for walking through hell and not becoming the fire." That line stuck with me, because that's what I feared most, not losing Alina, not even the years I gave her, but losing myself in the process. And I didn't. I found something stronger. It wasn't love, not in the romantic sense. Not yet. But it was peace. The kind you don't have to earn. The kind that sits with you like an old friend, nodding silently, letting you be. That night, I stayed behind after closing and worked on an old engine from a beat-up Ford that had seen better days. The bolts were rusted, the belts worn, the whole thing groaning like a body out of rhythm. But I knew how to fix it. Slowly, patiently, one piece at a time. The banner wasn't perfect. It hung a little crooked on the front of the shop, and wells and wrenches sagging like it needed a nap. But to me, it looked like gold. I stood across the street, arms folded, eyes locked on that hand-painted sign fluttering in the breeze like it had something to say. We'd been working on this day for months, late nights, early mornings, missed meals, endless trial and error. I learned more about small business licenses, insurance paperwork, and zoning regulations than I ever thought I'd need to. But I'd also learned something else, something deeper. When you build something with your own hands, you don't just create a business. You reclaim pieces of yourself that other people tried to take. The morning of the grand opening, I was at the shop before sunrise. The garage smelled like fresh paint and lemon-scented cleaner. The concrete floor, once a stained patchwork of oil spills and forgotten messes, now gleamed under the overhead lights. Rows of tools lined the walls. The air compressor was primed. Every car bay was spotless. I ran my hand over the main workstation, just to feel the smooth surface. This space was no longer a dream. It was real. Maribel arrived just before 7 a.m., carrying a giant thermos of coffee and a bag of warm breakfast biscuits. "You've got about 3 hours until the floodgates open," she said, handing me a biscuit. "You nervous?" "A little," I admitted, chewing slowly. "Not about the work, just what this means." She sat beside me on the small bench we'd placed outside the entrance. "It means you did something most people never get the courage to do. You took heartbreak and made it useful." I smiled at her. She always had a way of cutting through the noise. By 9, the parking lot was filling up. People from the neighborhood, former customers, friends, strangers who had seen the video months ago and said it had changed their lives. One by one, they showed up. A local band played near the sidewalk, upbeat and loud. Kids ran around with little toy wrenches we'd given out and goodie bags. Balloons danced along the chain-link fence. Even the mayor's assistant came by with a proclamation sealed in plastic, declaring the day Wells and Wrench's Community Empowerment Day. I almost laughed. A year ago, I was delivering chicken sandwiches in the back of a rented Corolla. Now I was shaking hands with someone who wore cufflinks just to hand me a certificate. At noon, we held a small ceremony. Maribel nudged me toward the mic. "You have to say something," she whispered. "This is your moment." I wasn't one for speeches, but I stepped up anyway. Not because I wanted attention, but because the people standing there deserved to hear what this place was about. I looked out over the crowd. Darnell stood near the back, arms folded, pretending not to smile. Luis was passing out water bottles like a pro. Mr. Landry was leaning against a post, nodding like he'd always known we'd get here. I cleared my throat. "You don't need a degree to be valuable," I said, voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "You don't need to wear a suit, or have the right name, or come from the right family. You need work. You need honesty. You need a reason to keep going. I paused, looking around the lot, locking eyes with a young boy sitting on the curb, holding a toy car in one hand and a donut in the other. This shop, I continued, is more than a place to fix things. It's a place where we rebuild, not just engines, people, confidence, futures. Every bolt tightened, every tire replaced, every scraped knuckle. It means something here. A few heads nodded. A woman near the front wiped her eyes. Maribel smiled softly from the side. I ended it simple. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for believing. We're just getting started. Applause followed. Not the thunderous kind, not the staged kind, but real, honest. The kind that filled you up instead of just echoing off walls. After the speech, I was pulled in every direction. Handshakes, congratulations, offers for partnerships, interviews I politely declined. I posed for a photo in front of the sign, not because I wanted to be seen, but because I finally felt like I belonged in the picture. Later in the afternoon, Maribel and I found a quiet moment behind the building, sitting on two overturned crates, sipping iced tea someone had dropped off in a cooler. You know, she said, nudging my arm, I remember the first time I saw you. Yeah. At her graduation, she said, the word her hanging in the air just long enough to be noticed. You looked like a man who didn't know if he should clap or cry. I chuckled. I think I did both. And now look at you, she said. You built something out of that hurt. You didn't let it define you. I looked at her, this woman who had stood by my side through so much, patient, firm, loyal in ways I hadn't experienced before. I didn't do it alone, I said. She smiled. Maybe not. But you were the one who showed up every day, who kept pushing. The sky began to shift, soft orange melting into the horizon. The party would wind down soon, but I wasn't in a hurry to send anyone home. Inside the shop, kids were gathered around a display engine we'd set up just for practice. Darnell was explaining something, gesturing with his hands, his face serious. A few adults watched with interest. One of them, a local teacher, leaned in and said, I wish we had something like this in schools. That meant more than they knew. Because Wells and Wrenches wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the community. To every person who'd ever felt like they didn't matter because their success didn't come with applause. To every kid who thought their story had to begin with privilege to be worth telling. That night, after everyone had gone and the shop was still and quiet again, I walked through the bays, flicking off the lights one by one. I touched the banner on the way out, the paint still faintly sticky near the edges. Before I locked the door, I looked back one last time. There was no noise, no celebration, just a calm, steady silence. And in that stillness, I felt something settle inside me. Not pride, not accomplishment, belonging. I was no longer the man who stood in the back of a graduation hall, wondering where he fit in. I was the man who built his own name. And it was enough. The lake was quiet that evening. The kind of still that doesn't make a sound but says everything. The water stretched out like glass, barely rippling as the sun began to dip behind the trees. I stood by the old dock, a rusted toolbox at my feet, and 5 boys circled around me, each one wearing a blue Wells and Wrenches shirt smudged with oil, sweat, and pride. We weren't here for a lesson in mechanics, not officially. But every moment with them was a lesson in something. Today's project? Rebuilding an old boat engine I'd pulled from the back of a retired fisherman's shed. It had been sitting in pieces for years, forgotten and rust-covered, but I saw potential in it, just like I had in them. All right, I said, kneeling beside the wooden bench and lifting the engine onto the stand. What's the first thing we check? Darnell, now 16 and one of my most focused apprentices, raised his hand like we were in school. Fuel system, he said. Make sure nothing's clogged. I nodded. Good. And spark plug, said another, Jalen, who had once been too shy to speak above a whisper. Exactly. The 5 of them got to work, careful and confident, tools in hand. I stepped back, just far enough to let them lead. That had been the goal all along. Not just to teach, but to step away when they were ready. I leaned against a wooden post and watched the sun melt into the lake. The orange glow touched the water like fire on glass. The boys laughed as they debated what part to clean next. A seagull called out in the distance. Somewhere behind us, someone was playing soft guitar, probably one of the vendors near the weekend campgrounds. And me? I was still, not searching, not escaping, just here. That boat engine, old as it was, began to take shape. Piece by piece, hose by hose. The grime was being scrubbed away. The rust chipped down to metal. A new life forming out of something once forgotten. I looked down at my hands. They were stained with grease and calluses, but they felt strong. Not from lifting or labor, but from holding up my own world when the one I built around someone else came crashing down. You think it'll run? Darnell asked, wiping sweat off his forehead. I tilted my head. What do you think? He smiled. We're getting close. They worked until the sun had nearly vanished. Then, as twilight settled in, we poured in the fuel, checked the wires, and held our breath. All right, I said, nodding at Jalen. Fire it up. He hesitated, then reached for the starter cord. One pull. Nothing. Two pulls. A cough. On the third pull, the engine sputtered, coughed again, and then, like a breath held too long, it roared to life. The boys jumped back, startled, then cheered in unison. Darnell threw his hands in the air. Jalen grinned so wide it looked like it hurt. One of the younger kids clapped so hard he dropped his socket wrench. I laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A real laugh, deep and full. They did it. I didn't have to say it. They knew. The engine's hum settled into a steady rhythm. A low, reliable growl. The sound of something old made new again. I crouched down, tightening a small bolt, and let them celebrate. Let them run around the dock, high-fiving each other like they'd just won the lottery. And in a way, they had. Because that engine wasn't just metal and spark. It was a symbol of what could be rebuilt, of what could run again, even when the world had given up on it. And me? I was just a man who'd learned the same thing in a harder way. A while later, when the dock quieted and the stars began to prick the sky, Darnell came to sit beside me. His hair was damp with sweat, his hands filthy, but his eyes were full of something solid. You ever think about what would have happened if none of this? He paused, gesturing toward the lake, the engine, the shop. Ever happened to you? I thought for a moment. Yeah, I said. All the time. And I looked out at the water. I think I would have still loved her. Still worked hard. Still sacrificed. But I don't think I ever would have known what I was capable of. He nodded, quiet. Then after a beat, he said, I'm glad she did what she did. That surprised me. Why? Because if she didn't, he said, we never would have had this. You. The shop. The classes. The chance to learn something that matters. I didn't say anything right away. Just clapped a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes the greatest things are born from the deepest losses. And sometimes, the people we become after the storm are the ones we were always meant to be. Later, after the boys had been picked up, after the tools were packed and the dock was dark again, I sat alone on the edge, feet hanging above the water, staring at the stars. No noise. No weight. Just stillness. A soft breeze passed over the lake. Somewhere behind me, Maribel walked up and sat beside me, her hands resting in her lap. You did good, she said, voice barely louder than the wind. They did good, I replied. She smiled. But they did good because of you. I glanced at her. The way the moonlight hit her face, the way her presence didn't press but simply existed beside mine, it made me feel like I wasn't alone, even in the silence. I never thought I'd make it here, I said quietly. Back when I was sitting in that auditorium, watching someone else take my place. Maribel nodded. You didn't just make it here. You built here. We sat in peace, the lake breathing beside us, the stars blinking slow and quiet above. There was no dramatic ending. No grand applause. No final twist. Just a man who learned how to stop being the shadow in someone else's story. A man who rebuilt his life with cracked knuckles, long days, and a heart that refused to stay broken. A man who heard the engine of his soul sputter, cough, then finally roar back to life. And this time, it was his own name on the sign.